Thunder Ridge. The desert wind howled through the canyon like a banshee's wail, kicking up clouds of red dust that painted the horizon crimson. Thunder Ridge stood defiantly against the brutal Arizona sun, its wooden buildings weathered and scarred from countless storms and the passage of hard men with harder intentions. Sheriff Jake Nyan Morrison adjusted his worn leather holster and stepped out of his office onto the creaking wooden boardwalk. His steel-gray eyes swept the main street, noting the unusual quiet that had settled over the town like a funeral shroud. The saloon doors hung still, no piano music drifted from within, and even old Pete's rocking chair sat empty outside the general store. Something was coming. Jake could feel it in his bones. The arrival. The thunder of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon before the riders appeared, a dust cloud rising like smoke from hell itself. Through the haze emerged the Devil's Canyon Gang, led by the most feared outlaw in the territory, Black Jack Murdoch. His midnight stallion pranced nervously as he surveyed the town, his cold blue eyes calculating, his black duster flowing behind him like wings of death. Behind him rode his lieutenants, Maria La Serpiente Vasquez, whose twin colts had sent more men to Boot Hill and Cholera, Tommy the Kid Henderson, barely 19 but already with 7 notches on his gun, and Big Ben Cartwright, a mountain of a man whose fists were as deadly as his Winchester. 20 more riders followed, a motley crew of desperados, claim jumpers, and killers who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from the chaos they brought. Well, Black Jack drawled, his voice carrying across the empty street like a rattler's warning. Thunder Ridge. Heard tell this little town's been prospering. Got itself a new silver mine, a bank full of money, and a sheriff who thinks he's tougher than leather. Jake stepped into the street, his hand resting casually on his Colt .45. The weapon had been his father's, carried through the war between the states and countless battles with Apache and Comanche. It had never failed him yet. Jack Murdoch, Jake called out, his voice steady as bedrock. You and your boys aren't welcome here. Turn around and ride out, and nobody needs to get hurt. Black Jack's laughter was like breaking glass. You hear that, boys? The sheriff's giving us orders. The gang erupted in cruel laughter, their hands moving closer to their weapons. The standoff. The two men faced each other across 50 yards of dusty street, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead, but his gun hand remained steady. He'd been in situations like this before, outnumbered, outgunned, but never outfought. I'm giving you one last chance, Murdoch, Jake said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Ride out now, or face the consequences. Black Jack's hand dropped to his gun. The only consequence here, Sheriff, is you're about to meet your maker. Time slowed to a crawl. Jake's hand moved like lightning, his Colt clearing leather in a blur of motion. Black Jack was fast, faster than most men Jake had faced, but not fast enough. The sheriff's bullet caught the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around in his saddle. But Jake's victory was short-lived. Maria's guns were already singing their deadly song, bullets whining past his ears as he dove behind a water trough. The kid's rifle cracked from across the street, wood splintering from the saloon's facade as Jake rolled to cover. The battle begins. The street erupted in chaos. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, muzzle flashes lighting up the afternoon like deadly fireworks. Jake found himself pinned behind the trough, outnumbered 20-1. Then, unexpectedly, the saloon doors burst open. Out stepped Ezra Deadeye Collins, a grizzled Confederate veteran turned saloon owner, his shotgun roaring defiance. From the hotel's second-story window, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's only physician and a crack shot with her father's Henry rifle, began picking off outlaws with surgical precision. The blacksmith, Thomas Iron Bear, a half-Cherokee giant with arms like tree trunks, emerged from his shop wielding a massive sledgehammer. His war cry split the air as he charged into the fray, scattering horses and riders alike. "This is our town!" Ezra shouted, his shotgun booming. "And we ain't giving it up without a fight." The tide turns. What had started as a simple robbery had become a full-scale war. The townspeople of Thunder Ridge, inspired by their sheriff's courage, poured from buildings and alleyways, armed with everything from hunting rifles to pickaxes. The barber wielded a straight razor, the school teacher clutched a derringer, and even the town drunk had found his courage at the bottom of a bottle. Maria spurred her horse toward the bank, her guns blazing, but Dr. Mitchell's rifle spoke first. The outlaw woman tumbled from her saddle, her reign of terror ended by a woman who'd sworn an oath to preserve life but wouldn't hesitate to take it to protect her home. Big Ben Cartwright roared his fury and charged toward the blacksmith shop, his massive frame intimidating even in defeat. But Thomas Iron Bear met him head-on, his sledgehammer connecting with the outlaw's rifle, sending it spinning into the dust. The two giants grappled, but Iron Bear's righteous fury gave him strength beyond measure. The kid, seeing his gang falling around him, tried to flee but found his path blocked by Jake, who'd fought his way through the chaos. "Going somewhere, son?" Jake asked, his colt trained on the young outlaw. Tommy's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jake's voice stopped him cold. "Don't do it, kid. You're young enough to start over. Don't throw your life away for Black Jack's greed." The final confrontation. Black Jack, wounded but not defeated, had made his way to the church, the highest ground in town. From the bell tower, he could see the battle raging below, his carefully planned robbery dissolving into chaos. His shoulder burned like fire, but his hatred burned hotter. "Morrison," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Come face me like a man, or I'll burn this whole town down." Jake looked up at the church steeple, where Black Jack stood silhouetted against the sky like a dark angel. The sheriff checked his ammunition, 3 bullets left. It would have to be enough. The climb up the narrow church stairs was treacherous, each step potentially his last. Black Jack's voice echoed from above, "You should have minded your own business, Sheriff." This town was ripe for the taking. "Every town someone's home, Jack," Jake replied, his boots creaking on the old wooden steps. "And every home's worth defending." The reckoning. They faced each other in the cramped bell tower, the great bronze bell hanging between them like a metallic moon. Black Jack's left arm hung useless at his side, but his gun hand was steady. Jake's uniform was torn and bloody, but his resolve was unshaken. "You know how this ends, Morrison," Black Jack said, his voice almost conversational. "One of us doesn't walk away." "I know," Jake replied simply. "Question is, which one of us is fighting for something worth dying for?" The bell tower erupted in gunfire. Both men moved simultaneously, their weapons speaking in the ancient language of the frontier. Black Jack's shot went wide, thrown off by his wounded shoulder. Jake's bullet found its mark, and the outlaw leader tumbled from the tower, his reign of terror ended forever. The aftermath. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Thunder Ridge began to count its cost. The street was littered with debris and spent cartridges, but the town still stood. Of the 21 outlaws who had ridden in, only 3 remained alive, Tommy the Kid among them, his hands raised in surrender. Dr. Mitchell moved among the wounded, her medical bag replacing her rifle as she tended to friend and foe alike. The townspeople gathered in the street, their faces reflecting the mixture of relief and sorrow that follows every victory. Jake stood in the doorway of his office, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. Thomas Iron Bear approached, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "Sheriff," the blacksmith said, his voice carrying the weight of respect. "This town owes you a debt." Jake shook his head. "We all stood together, Thomas. That's what made the difference." Ezra Collins emerged from the saloon, a bottle of his finest whiskey in hand. "I figure this calls for a celebration," he said, but his voice carried little joy. "Though I reckon we'll be burying some good folks tomorrow." The new dawn. That night, Thunder Ridge held its vigil. The church bell, the same one that had witnessed the final showdown, tolled for the fallen, its bronze voice carrying across the desert like a prayer. The town had paid a price for its freedom, but it had been willing to pay it. Tommy the Kid sat in the jail cell, his young face etched with the weight of his choices. "What happens now, Sheriff?" he asked. Jake looked at the boy, for that's all he really was, despite the guns and the reputation. "Now you have a choice, son. You can let this be the end of one story and the beginning of another. Or you can let it be just the end. 3 days later, a supply wagon rolled into Thunder Ridge, its driver expecting to find a town cowed by Black Jack's gang. Instead, he found a community that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The silver mine was working again, the bank was open, and the saloon doors swung freely. Jake Morrison stood on his porch, watching the sun rise over the canyon walls. His badge gleamed in the morning light, and his hand rested easy on his holster. Thunder Ridge had found its peace, but Jake knew it was a peace that would need defending again someday. That was the way of the West, violent, unforgiving, but ultimately just. It was a land where a man's word was his bond, where justice came at the end of a gun, and where communities were forged in the crucible of shared struggle. Thunder Ridge would endure, Jake knew. It would endure because good people had been willing to stand up when it mattered most. And as long as there were men and women willing to fight for what was right, the frontier would never truly be tamed. The desert wind still howled through the canyon, but now it carried with it the sound of children's laughter, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, and the distant whistle of the evening train. Thunder Ridge had written its name in the annals of the West, not with the blood of conquest, but with the courage of those who refused to surrender to fear. And Sheriff Jake Morrison, his duty done for another day, walked back into his office to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Because in the end, that's what heroes do. They stand ready, they stand firm, and they stand together. The end.